Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this edition of 30 on Thursdays, our bi-weekly webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about building charts with PowerView in SharePoint 2013 and Excel 2013. But while people are still joining, I'm going to go through some logistical information on what 30 on Thursdays are and how you can interact with today's session. So as I mentioned, 30 on Thursdays is a bi-weekly 30-minute webinar series that we've been doing almost 2 years now on anything and everything having to do with SharePoint. Our next one is scheduled for 2 weeks from today, Thursday, March 7th, and we're going to talk about some of the new social features of SharePoint 2013. And you can get our full schedule at SusQtech.com/webinars. Today's session is being recorded, so if somebody joined late or I have to leave early, it'll be available on our website in the next day or so, as well as the entire archive of all of our past webinars are available at SusQtech.com/archive-webinars. And as Mike goes through the information today, you can use the question window, typically located on the right-hand side, as part of GoToWebinar. We'll save all the questions till the end. I'll be your moderator. I'm Steve Witt from SusQtech, and we'll read any questions at the very end once Mike's got through all the material. We do a number of paid training courses here at SusQtech, so if you're interested, we have an Nintex 2-day class coming up in March on the 13th and 14th, as well as we have a 3-hour session on using jQuery in SharePoint 2010 coming up on March 28th, and that goes from 1 to 4 p.m. Eastern on that day. And you can learn more about all of our training and our online training courses at SusQtech.com/online-training. And we have a bunch of those courses that have been recorded as well, so if you'd like to purchase and download it, those are available at the same location /online-training. So without further ado, we're going to get into today's topic, which again is building charts with PowerView with SharePoint 2013 and Excel 2013. Our presenter today is Mike McManus. He's the Director of Training here at SusQtech, and again, I'll be your moderator. I'm Steve Witt. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'll turn it over to Mike.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Let me just get my desktop showing here. Okay, so let's just make sure everybody can see my screen here. All right. Thank you very much, Steve. As Steve mentioned, I'm Mike McManus, and I'm going to be running you through a quick kind of demonstration about PowerView for Excel 2013 and how we can integrate that into SharePoint 2013. So for those of you who might have done some business intelligence work with SharePoint in the past, you're probably familiar with a number of different interfaces that we can use to create nice interactive visual reports with SharePoint, or to use in conjunction with SharePoint. So PowerView is something that we have that's new. We get a really nice, relatively easy to use interface in Excel 2013. And we're going to take a look at first just some basic characteristics, and then I'll get in there and actually show you a little bit. We're not going to be able to do a whole lot of real in-depth demos, only because we have a relatively short window here, but hopefully this will give you at least a little bit of information and let you see some of the capabilities, some of the ease of use. Just keep in mind that you can create very complex PowerView reports with a lot of interactivity. We're going to be creating some things that are much more simple, but again, focus on the fundamentals here, and hopefully your imagination will kind of lead you where you might be able to go. So from the Microsoft site, we basically think of PowerView as an interactive data exploration, visualization, and presentation experiences that encourages intuitive ad hoc reporting. That's quite a mouthful. What are we really talking about here? Really, what it means is that PowerView gives us a relatively easy way so that we can visually represent data. But more than just visually represent it, as we might be able to do through some other reporting tools, we really get the capabilities for exploration. And what that means is, as you're going to see, it's really easy for us to put multiple data visualizations, which I would consider just a fancy way of saying a chart. Right? We can put multiple charts together and have those charts work together so that as we select one element in one chart, we're going to see that it's going to have a filtering effect on other charts. And that's where we can really get into, you know, the other bullets we see here, the data exploration or what they're calling the intuitive ad hoc reporting, the ability to really get in there and in an online format interact with the charts as an end user, and that's really where we get a lot of functionality. So generally we see this is available through Excel 2013, right, as part of Office 2013, SharePoint 2013, and SharePoint 2010 to some degree. SharePoint 2010 allows us through the Excel services to display these kinds of reports that we create through PowerView. 2013 has a little bit more integration, and really what makes all this run and work very well in this sort of integrated mode is SQL Server 2012 Service Pack 1 Reporting Services add-on. This is where we can really kind of integrate in the types of visualizations that we will create through PowerView in Excel and really make them into kind of standalone reports that we can store and display through SharePoint. So basically when we think about this, we want to think about what can we report on, right? So we've got to have data. Not going to have much of a data visualization if we don't have data. So when we're thinking about creating reports, visual reports, whether it's through PowerView or Power Pivot for Excel or the report builder tools that we get with SQL reporting services or the dashboard designer that we get from Performance Point Services or the chart web part, any of the different things we have that we can use to create data visualizations or charts, really. They all depend obviously on what underlying data we can use. So we're going to take a look, rather than me listing out every possible thing that we can get data from, I'm going to show you that in the demonstration. But as kind of an overview here, one of the nice things is that we can actually have data inside of an Excel workbook and use that as our data source for our PowerSheet view. The PowerSheet view is really just another worksheet we're going to see in our Excel file that has some visual tools built in to help us build our reports. And for those of you that have used things like the Dashboard Designer or the Report Builder 3.0 for SQL reporting services, and to some degree the Power Pivot for Excel capabilities that all of which we see in 2010, Office 2010 and SharePoint 2010, the PowerView sheet is very similar. It does have some nice distinctions, though, that I'll talk about. So that's one thing. We can have our data actually stored within Excel. We can take that data and really anything that we store in Excel, and we can publish that out to a Power Pivot gallery, and we can use that as the data source in other PowerView sheets. We can pull data that's relational. You know, we've got SQL Server relational databases with tables. We can join those tables together and create really nice PowerView reports from that. And then we can also take data that has been deployed into SQL analysis services, as long as they are deployed as tabular models. We can use that as the source of data for our PowerView reports. Okay, a little more about this. When we think about PowerView report files, we really want to think about two different kinds. So first of all, we can create PowerView reports for SharePoint, and they're actually stored as RDLX files. Now, you might be familiar with RDL files. Those are report definition files that we generally would use with SQL reporting services. These are different. The PowerView reports are RDLX files, and it's really because of the way that the reports are basically saved and configured with all of the data and all of the interactivity. So just remember that they are different from what you might be used to working with as RDL files. When we create them and store our PowerView sheets directly within Excel, then we're storing those as XLSX files, you know, your standard Excel files. And of course, we can deploy these, publish our Excel files up to SharePoint, store them in SharePoint libraries, and then of course using Excel services, using just the Excel services web part, we can display these files. So whether we create our PowerView as RDLX files or create them and publish them as XLSX files, we can still get that information to be visually displayed within SharePoint. Now, regardless of which of these we're using, in order to get the interactivity and everything to work, we do need to have Silverlight installed to use either the RDLX or the XLSX files for our PowerView reports. So what can we do? Well, we can create visualizations. We can create tables and just display them as tables. Or more frequently, we're going to create kind of the more exciting types of visualizations, and these are going to be our visual charts. Pie charts, line charts, bar graphs, those kinds of things. And what's really nice is it's very easy for us after we create charts to integrate in other charts as ways that we can report the data differently. And what we're going to see is as we do this, these other charts that we combine together are going to have an interactivity so that we can select, say, maybe one chart is a subset of another chart. And when we select a data member, it will actually flow through and filter out the larger chart. Okay? And we're going to see how easy it is to do that. We're going to also look at how we can put in place filters or slicers, things that we can use not really to display data by itself, but rather to give us a way through multiple dimensions to actually go in and let the end user, just by selecting different values, implement filtering on our visual charts. Okay, we also will see that multiple views of reports are supported within PowerView. Now, in terms of performance, this is a really nice thing about the way PowerView works by default. Okay, it only will retrieve data it needs at any given time for data visualization. In other words, if we've got millions of rows of data or thousands of rows of data or whatever, at the point of generating the visualization itself, PowerView will only retrieve back from the data source whatever data it is necessary or is needed to display the visualization, the tables, etc. So the fact that that works automatically is very nice for us because it can prevent us from having huge data sets that simply to render a small subset in a visual chart could cause some performance degradation. Okay, we can also share reports, obviously, right, because we're talking about integrating in with SharePoint, so we want to be able to actually go across and let other people see these things. A couple ways we can do it. Well, again, we could take our Excel workbook that we use to generate our PowerView reports, and we can publish those directly to a SharePoint 2013 site. Okay, of course, we do have to have Excel services running if we want to be able to, render out and actually see the contents through Excel, just like we would have to do, if we were just creating anything, any workbook in Excel. Okay, we could also use Excel web apps. It does support integration with either on-premises SharePoint or SharePoint 365. And then once we've deployed our Excel workbooks up into SharePoint, others can use those to, to display the contents through the Excel services web part. Assuming permissions have been granted, other users can open up those Excel workbooks and edit them, make changes to them. And the other thing is we can actually hide our individual sheets in Excel. So maybe what we want to do is, hide the data sheets in Excel so that the only thing we're generating and displaying are the actual PowerSheet views. So we can do all of that kind of interactivity or configuration with Excel in terms of the individual sheets in the workbooks. Another nice thing here that we have is when we put them into the reports, into the libraries that we're storing them in. Again, when we get right down to it, even though it's a PowerView report that's stored in an Excel file, we store that in a library. It's just another file in a SharePoint library. So all of the same SharePoint functionality that we're used to working with is going to be applicable. Things like, if we wanted to manage versions, require checkout. We've also got, of course, our regular SharePoint permission model, so we can determine who can make changes, who can view the content of the file, who can edit the content of those files. So once we've got that content in SharePoint, we can manage that Excel file just as if it were any other content in SharePoint. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about what PowerView is and what it isn't, especially as it relates to other tools we might use to create, business intelligence reports. So PowerView isn't going to replace either of the tools that we might generally use for creating reports through SQL reporting services. It's not an alternative to that. Well, I guess it is an alternative, but it's not something that we're going to use to kind of replace the other two primary methods. One is the report builder, right? So report builder, especially version 3 that we get with SharePoint 2010 when we integrate into SQL reporting services, still there, still a valid option for creating reports, especially if we're creating reports specifically for SQL reporting services. Also the report designer. Usually this is something we're going to access through BIDS, the Business Intelligence Development Studio, and usually the report designer is something that usually our developers or more technical users can use to create reports. Those are still there, and PowerView does not replace them. However, we can use PowerView to create reports to use in lieu of reports that we might previously have created using either the report builder tool or the report designer tools. But again, make note of that final bullet is that we cannot work with the RDL reports or edit them that we would create through, say, report builder, report designer. We cannot work with those in PowerView. So especially if you have a lot of legacy RDL reports, you're going to still need to work with the existing or the same products you probably used to create those, either the report designer or the report builder. Okay, so let's go ahead and just actually get in here and take a look at some things. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up a SharePoint site. Okay, so this is a site that is just using, this is a site that was created using the Business Intelligence site template within SharePoint. So what I want to do is just show some examples here. So this is just a dashboard, which when you get right down to it, a lot of times in business intelligence, we hear all these great fancy terms, dashboard. Well, a dashboard is really just a web part page, right? So this is a dashboard where I'm showing an Excel file through the Excel web access web part, again, based upon Excel services. And what I'm showing here is the contents of an Excel file that contains a lot of different business intelligence tools. Okay, some of this was all created through, not some of it, it was all created through Excel. And you see a lot of different types of reports here. So all of these things we can create through Excel through the PowerView interface. So let's just take a look at some different things. Up here we've got this section that says named item. And in here we're seeing all of these different values. And watch what happens when I select one of those. We're going to notice that the other reports have changed. And the reason is these reports are all using underlying data. And what we've put in place here are different filters and slicers and ways in which we can report data. Let me just clear out that, and we'll look back down here at our sales by region pie. Look up here. We've got this little slicer we've defined with dates. So I can just click on a date visualization, and we're going to see the other data elements, whether they're just tables here or this bar graph below, all changing. So we see here the dates are changing to only include 09. If I filter that out, we see down here in this bar graph all of the dates from the year 06 through 2012. And we also see these other little visualizations to the right also changing. So this interactivity is what I'm talking about, and it's really easy to achieve that interactivity. Now, I'm not going to create anything this fancy. We just don't have time. But let me show you some relatively simple things. So I've got Excel 2013 open here, and what I'm looking at is a PowerView sheet. Now, this is a sheet that was created to create reports from SQL Server. So what I'm going to try to do, and hopefully performance will allow me to do this in the next couple of minutes, is I'm going to replicate what I've created right here, just to show you how relatively easy it is. Okay, so in this new Excel file, I'm going to go to the Data tab, and I need to first create a connection to data, right? I can't really create data visualizations without any data. So from the Data tab, you notice in the section that says Get External Data, these are the different places we can get data from. So from Access, from Web, usually from the web, that might be from, a specific web page, things like that. I'm going to go to other sources. So this is where we get a lot of our options. So from SQL Server, okay, so we can bring in just relational databases, content from SQL Server databases, from analysis services, from the Windows Azure Marketplace. If you've got a market feed, you can bring that in. It supports, PowerView supports connecting via the OData data feed methodology, XML data. We can actually run through a data connection wizard. This is usually going to create just a pretty generic connection using the OADB provider or from a Microsoft query. In this case, I'm going to connect to a SQL Server database, and I'm going to connect via the IP. Of course, if we support, named connections, we could connect that way as well. And let me just get my password. All right, so once we connect to our database here, we should be able to get some data. Now, hopefully this, like I said, this won't take too long. If it does, yeah, looks like having some connectivity issues. Let me try this one more time. And if not, we'll just go back to using the one that I've already created. What it's actually doing when I'm connecting, after I define the tables and the queries that I want to connect with, it's actually going to import that in as a local data set. Now, it is refreshable and it is dynamic. Okay, it looks like I've got oh, I see what the problem is. I just had a bad IP address. There we go. There we go. So now I'm going to select just the AdventureWorks sample database, and I'm going to choose to connect to multiple tables. So I just want to show you how easy this is. So let me just select a few tables from that AdventureWorks database. I'm going to choose the product table, the category table, the subcategory table, some of my sales data, my order history data, and the sales territory. And you notice down here, import relationships between tables. That's really nice because I won't have to go in after the fact and define relationships because I'm importing content from multiple tables. This is going to save my connection as an ODC file, and I'm telling it that I'm going to view this data in PowerView reports. And so what it's going to do after it imports all the data is it's actually going to create a PowerView sheet, much like we see here. So you notice here we've got a tab for data, and that's where we represent our data. And then we've got one for products. This is the PowerView report. This is the PowerView 3. That's the new one that I just created by connecting back to that data. So let me show you how easy it is to create this functionality. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create that big bar graph we see here. And all we have to do is choose the data fields that we want included. So what I want to do is first of all get from my order detail, I'm going to get my order quantity because I want to report how many items were sold. Now, we also want to report this by territory group, Europe, North America, Pacific, and by country. And so down here within my territories table, I'm going to choose my country code, and I'm going to choose the group. Now, first, when I select these, it's just going to report everything to me as a table. But all I have to do is select the table, come up here to the switch visualization, and we see the different kinds of charts that we can define. I'm just going to create this as a clustered column chart. And so we notice by default, we've got our group, we've got our countries, and we've got our sales quantity. And over here in the field pane, we notice that it took a guess at where we wanted things. Now we could switch things around if we wanted to, just by moving things from the axis to the legend. You notice that effect? This is the way I want it. Now let me show you how this works. This is pretty cool. These groups are built-in filters. If I click on one of those and say just North America, it's just going to show me the data for North America. But let's put some other stuff in effect here. So again, over here you notice we've got order quantity by name where we're breaking down things by category. So if I want to do that, then all I have to do is come back into my view section, and I'm going to choose my category name and the same metric here, the from my details table, I'm going to get my order quantity. I'm going to select those, and I'm going to make those a chart as well. And let me just drag this down. And now look what happens. When I select bike, it automatically is connected, and it filters my total data, even though I'm not using my category name as any kind of a, a metric or a filter over in this chart. It automatically does that connection. Now, another thing I can do is I can define a slicer. So up here we see that I'm also want to be able to just manually filter everything, right, by these groups. Let me show you how we do that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and let's just take a look. What groups are we looking at? Well, we're looking at our territory groups. And so I'm going to come down here and select that, put it in as a table, and all I have to do is choose slicer, and that will automatically now essentially make this into a filter, kind of a global filter. So that's what a slicer is a filter. And the other nice thing is you'll notice I can drag these little elements wherever I want in the pane. They're not, we don't have this concept of, like having them to stick in certain areas. So let me do this. Let me just clear out all of this stuff here, all of my filters. Sometimes it's a little tricky depending on where we click. There we go. So now what I'm doing by clicking this slicer, it in both of these is only showing me the data for Europe or for North America. Okay, and if I were to click North America down here, you'll notice it has a different impact. It just sort of, adjusts what's showing, but it does still show the totals, right? So even over here in this report, even though it's not tied to this report, these groups are still linked together. And that's sort of where we get that nice interactivity. All right, let me just clear this out. And we can very easily create slicers on other things. Maybe I want to see things by the subcategories, right? So I'm going to choose a name. Click over here, choose a name, make that a slicer. And now you'll notice we've got our subcategories. And they're going to be dependent upon whatever category we've selected. So if I were to say, let me look at the bike category, within there I can change to one of the appropriate subcategories. So creating these filters and these reports, really pretty easy. Now obviously, again, I didn't put much time into designing or laying this out just because we didn't have a lot of time. But in just this relatively short period, we're able to get a lot of really cool functionality going on here. And if we were to put more time into it, really the sky's the limit, and that's how we can end up with something that looks more like this. And this is nothing more than just a bunch of those different objects that I put onto the screen here, right, being displayed. And you notice we've got a lot of different things. We can put spark lines in here. We can put KPI kind of indicators in here. We can do a lot of really cool stuff here. So hopefully this has been a good introduction to some of the capabilities that we have in PowerView. Thank you very much for your time.
Great, thanks, Mike. There are a couple of questions. One of the questions I think you kind of answered was about the SQL connectivity, and you covered kind of how you did that. Now, if you were to publish your example here out to SharePoint 2013, could you preserve and have that SQL data be accessible in the chart?
Yeah, so that what we're seeing here on this screen is, it's just an Excel Web Access web part showing us the contents of an Excel file that is stored in a library. And you'll notice when we display it, we get this little data tab. Let's just refresh the underlying connections. So we can choose to refresh just one connection if we've selected something, all connections. And you'll notice it also supports different tabs. So I've got, for example, here I'm actually showing the data. But the data itself I'm also showing with things with like spark lines built in. So we've got all these different ways that we can show the data, but we can always define how we want to refresh the data.
And do you have the option of, in the case you just showed, you actually had the data in there, but if you wanted to, obscure the details of your SQL data and just make the PowerView sheet available, can you do that?
Absolutely. So we would just hide that. So in the case of this, what this is actually a table that's been created by selecting different fields from the connection. And then, so we've chosen how we want to display that data. Now, if we didn't want to, for example, in my sample here, I could hide that data tab. Okay, the reports are still there, they're still working, and if we were to publish this up, then that's all we're going to see. We can also hide these other, like the filter tab. We can hide the field list tab, so that all we're showing is the actual PowerView sheet itself.
Gotcha, and then that's what's available in SharePoint once you publish it out.
Exactly.
Great. Well, I think that does it for the questions. I'll give it another couple of seconds, see if anybody else chimes in. But Mike, I'd like to thank you for your time this afternoon. This was great. Great introduction to PowerView and Excel 2013 and SharePoint 2013. And to everybody out there, we'll see you in 2 weeks where we're going to talk about some of the social features available in SharePoint 2013. One more question just came in. The recordings are available on our website at susqtech.com/archive webinars, and this recording will be up probably the next day or so. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
The organizer has ended the session.